Hi, class. So this week's critical thinking, I want to say that first, when it comes to chapter 11, I totally agree with it. And the one thing that first stood out for me was that it really doesn't matter how there our years of schooling, that's independent from us becoming sociocentric because really it's sort of it is subconscious too, and because as humans we are social, so we need to become social. It's just part of human nature, and once because it's part of human nature, then we can be let off to sociocentrism. We form groups, we get into groups that have their own way of thinking, and we are consumed by it, and we accept it. So I really like how the book brought that about being about the being independent years of schooling. It doesn't really change anything because even that is systematic. Now let's go into the example. The example is here in Honduras, for instance. Um, our Independence Day is on the 15th of September, and that has been going on for 100 years. It's in all school textbooks, both public and private. And what happens here is that there's a serious issue here with sociocentrism and what the government has made us believe. Why? Because the truth of the matter is the 15th of September is technically or officially Independence Day, but that's a lie. That's a big lie. It's not. How do I know this? Well, again, critical thinking, rational thinking. I had a friend from Tennessee who passed away, and he was a historian. And then my one of my family members also, he is a professor, and we got into this, and they showed me evidence, and not and there are other people that know where actually it's true. This is all a lie, and it's part of sociocentrism because they're forcing us to believe it, and we have to accept it. When in reality, it's not. It's also part of sociocentrism that the government literally makes the schools march on that day under the sun with heavy high temperatures, 35 degrees centigrade, even 40 sometimes. Students have literally fainted, sunburns, all that stuff. And that's sort of the social, let's just say that the social norm, the rule that they must do it, because if they don't, the school gets penalized. So I think, so how can we approach that? It's very hard. It's very hard to answer that because the simplest way would be awareness. At universities, at schools, teachers have to sort of change their way and start making students aware that this is not the case. What's the problem there? Well, the problem is that the textbooks are already printed with such information. So it's very difficult to change that. So in order for that to happen, it's going to take a long time, and the government will have to eventually admit, well, we have been lying to you all this time. It wasn't on the 15th of September. I don't even know why. I think it's ridiculous. And another thing I'll give one more example. I'm not a racist, just to clarify that. But when I was living in Prague, I saw how I know that with Islam there's the Shiite and the Sunni, and I noticed how almost all the men there while I was teaching ESL, I had students. I saw them on the streets as well, and the men were all wearing jeans and khakis and t-shirts, and the women were always covered. You know what I mean? What I mean. And then I met some Islams in the states, some Muslim people at university, and it was a whole different ballgame. They were wearing the women they were wearing shorts, t-shirts. It was like no, we were different kinds. So this is how I see sociocentrism, uh, sort of limiting the woman because they think it's right, because society think it's right, and the men are just free to wear whatever they want. I saw that in Prague, and again, to change that, it's going to take a long time. because the ideologies that have been instilled in these countries and this religion and the branches of these religions, uh, it's just too hard. It's just too hard. So in other ways to change it, it's a matter of time. It's a matter of reforms in the laws, in governmental laws in these countries. I think that's the way it has to be tackled. Otherwise, it's going to be very hard. Well, to close up, when it comes to Dr. Linda Elders, um, I I think she's right when she says that we have to take command of two forces that are the barriers to rational thinking. And then she says that you can't fully command them because they're so powerful within us. So to expand on that, I simply say that I have to agree we can't take full command of it, and I think it's mainly because of society, because of the external factors that affect society, especially the media, the press, and the marketing behind, even the marketing behind products, uh, which state that this is good when maybe something is not good. So it's really hard. I think that what she's saying is that there are codes necessary that need to be enforced in society, uh, but we have to keep a balance between those codes and what's ethically right. And I know that that's something very hard to do. So that's pretty much my. And one more thing before I forget, going back to chapter 11, there was an example here. It says that there's this quote: in everyday life of sociocentric thinkers, we can find many self-serving uses of language that obscure unethical behavior. I wasn't so sure what the book means by that. Obscure unethical behavior. And then they put the example of the Indians and the Europeans and how the Europeans justify their behaviors because the Indians were savages. So how would that obscure unethical behavior? Wouldn't that mean that the European and their behavior was actually making light of, or actually, let me just say, enhancing unethical behavior? I hope you know what I mean. Ethical behavior would be not treating them the way they were treated. That's what I think ethical behavior would be. But I'm not a racist, but then again, we there was a clash between two sociocentric groups, the Europeans and the Indians, and we have to understand, we have to put ourselves in both situations to see what's really happening. Uh, I'm not saying that the Europeans were right about everything they did, so don't get me wrong, but to some extent, I even see here the traits of, we can call it Indians and the savages. Again, I'm not a racist, so don't quote me wrong, but I know from history, and especially the history here, that there were a lot of savage actions from the Indians. They used to chop off heads when they used to play football, for example, and some of their games. They used to do a lot of sacrifices. So the Europeans were actually shocked from that. So I think that in a way, it's not just only what the book made a mistake here. I think it's not just to pinpoint at the Europeans, because they saw some things too that were just unethical. So how are they obscuring unethical behavior? In that case, they are actually enhancing unethical behavior from both the Europeans and even the Indians to make the thing balanced. If any one of you can clarify that for me, I'd be more than happy to hear. So those are my examples. Those are my thoughts about Dr. Linda Elder when it comes to how difficult it is to break these two barriers. Again, going back to how we are so influenced by external factors, that it's going to take a long process, and it's an individual process to begin with. Those are my thoughts.